Bears fans, what's up? Welcome into another edition of Bear Report Live. We've got Usayd Koshul, Andrew Freeman, and Zack Pearson in the house. You can follow us on Twitter at Bear Report. You can follow our personal Twitter handles at Usayd Koshul, at AJ Freeman25, and at Zack_Pearson. That's ZACK_Pearson. Guys, it's been a busy 5 to 6 hours. I mean, everything was quiet up until I want to say 3:30, 4 o'clock. The Bears went ahead and sent Khalil Mack packing back to the West Coast, back to the AFC West, where he'll have a chance to possibly sack Derek Carr twice a year, get after Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes too, and face Justin Herbert every single day in practice. Chicago unloads Max contract. It's the first major move of Ryan Poles' tenure with the Bears. But how are we doing today, guys? And then let's just jump into the thoughts and reactions on this trade.
Yeah, I mean, crazy in a way, but not like unexpected. I think people overreact because you see the second rounder, and I don't think Ian Rappaport's tweet the wording really helps because it sounds like it was a second round and a sixth round next year. But when you go back and look, it's a second round this year, a sixth next year. Yeah, I see the argument where you should have got a little more, but long term, like this is a great move because the Bears are not going to have to pay him over $20 million in each of 2023 and 2024. They get $6 million in cap space. Yeah, they got to eat a $24 million dead cap hit, but that was expected anyway. Like, they move so much money down the line with Ryan Pace that they're going to have to pay it eventually. So I'm not surprised. It just tells me one thing. It says 2022 is pretty much going to be a wash. If they get to the 7th seed, get to the playoffs, it's a win for them, but they're looking for the future right now, starting in 2023.
Yeah, I would say that I think the big thing to take away from this is that Ryan Poles is not afraid to make big, gutsy moves. And this is certainly a big, gutsy move. You trade away your best player, your most outside of Justin Fields, your most marketable player right before free agency begins. That's a big gusty move, coming in here in his first year. So when I first heard the trade details, I was a little bit torn on it. Like you kind of mentioned, Zach, the way it was kind of reported with the picks. Like at first I thought it was just a 2023 second round pick and a 2023 six. And, when I first heard that, I was like, no, that doesn't sound right because, you're not getting any picks for this year. So what's the advantage for, trading them off now because you're not even getting anything to help you out this year. And it's not like the cap savings are that much anyway. You're only getting $6 million in cap savings about. So, it's something, but it's not a lot where you can say that, okay, we can go out and then get, a big money free agent with those savings to kind of make up for that. It's not that. It's a little bit here and there where you can get maybe one or two extra role players for your team, but it's not a ton of money there that they're saving. It's mainly, I think, for Ryan Poles' perspective, trying to clear the books for 2023 and beyond and just eating all that dead money, like you mentioned, this year where, I'm not saying they're not going to try to be competitive this year, but they're obviously not contending. They're still trying to put their stamp on this roster. They're going to be retooling this thing. And the one thing I have, the only thoughts I have going forward is, if Mac wasn't safe on this roster, who else isn't safe on this roster? Because this is a big swing for Ryan Poles to just do this right now and just rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. And again, I'm torn on this because Khalil Mack is one of my favorite Bears of all time. So it's a thing where, as a fan, you hate seeing this go down. It's a gut punch because you want to see, at least me personally, I want to see Khalil Mack retire as a Bear eventually down the line. But when you start to think about it a little bit and you start looking to the future here, it makes a lot of sense. You need to start getting younger on this roster. You need to get more draft capital. You need to start clearing cap space in the future, and you need to start putting more resources into the offense. And that means taking some of the resources you put in on the defense over the last 5 years or so and switching that over to the other side of the ball, because that's the only way you're going to be able to win sustainably in the NFL, especially with Justin Fields. That's all that matters now. So who else is going to be on the trade block? Is Eddie Jackson on the trade block? Is Robert Quinn going to be out the door soon here? Do they, even entertain trading a guy like Roquan Smith, who's going into the final year of his contract on his 5th-year option? David Montgomery, is he on the trade block as a running back who, typically you don't want to re-sign running backs to a lot of money here. So what is his trade market going to be? So it gets a lot of questions going. But overall, I'm still emotions are a little bit raw off the trade. But I think it makes sense for where the direction this team is going. And we'll just have to see what Ryan Poles does with the rest of this offseason to kind of get a full picture view of it moving forward.
And I think there's something to be said for this right now because, and I kind of noted a couple of these observations on Twitter, but I just want to go ahead and expand on them. Is that when you look at this roster, I mean, it became very clear that the current makeup of the roster, things just were not working by the end of the 2020 season. Now, I understand George McCaskey kind of opted to basically run it back with Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, but then we really look at it throughout 2021, nothing was working. The only reason people semi thought it could work is, and this goes for offense and defense, is simply because of Justin Fields. But at the end of the day, like Ryan Poles walked into this situation, he basically saw this is not going to work. We can't really win anything in 2022. We need to basically say, let's gut the roster in the short term to better prepare for the long term. Because again, as I've noted on Picks for Polls time and time again, when you draft a quarterback, you're not making a 3, 4, 5-year investment. You're making what you hope to be a 15 to 20-year investment. And I think playing the long game here is certainly something that we haven't seen the Bears do in probably 2 to 3 decades at this point. And every single time this team fires a general manager and adds someone, what really tends to happen is that the Bears are always kind of in this, we're going to try and compete right now. We're going to try and win. And reality is 3, 4, 5 years down the road, it shoots themselves in the foot. Now, I want to take a step back here and just say this for the record in terms of taking the long game. I know no one right now on this live stream was alive in 1985, but I remember when the Bears hired Mike Ditka, one of the things that he talked about in one of the first team meetings was, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that give me 3 years, we're going to the Super Bowl. The bad news is half you are not going to be here. We have to play the long game here too, in the sense that the Bears need to understand that half of these players on this roster, I wouldn't even say half, I'd say probably like 95, 96% of them outside of, I want to say, Roquan Smith, Jalen Johnson, Darnell Mooney, and Justin Fields, because those are your 4 super true building blocks. 95% of this roster is not going to be around in 3 to 4 years anyway, when the Bears legitimately hope to be good with Poles and Eberflus. And so we talk about roster turnover being so prevalent in the NFL. This is a trade that I know a lot of people don't want to see, but then at the end of the day, it's a quarterback driven league. And if you're not figuring out ways to continuously invest in your quarterback, because this is what this move is basically signaling here, is we're going to get, less expensive and younger on defense, and we're going to channel those resources back into the quarterback position and just build around that quarterback. That's what's going on here, and that's what Poles is really hoping to do.
When Andrew, when you said pretty much, you don't know who is safe, I agree with that. I think you have you have 2 cornerstones that you hope, at least Justin Fields and Roquan Smith, one on each side of the ball. I think Jalen Johnson, someone you can consider that. I think Darnell Mooney is right there. Players like Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum, we're still young. We don't exactly know what they are. But overall, I mean, it's like you said, it's going to be 95% turnover in a couple of years. There's just not going to be everyone here, barring, let's say Eddie Jackson kind of turns it around and they can get, a cheap extension or something like that. What it also told me was when Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus did their evaluations, they really do not like this roster. They just don't like it. There's no one safe. They're not really married to anyone on here. I guess Justin Fields is someone you're married to because he's on a young rookie contract. But, I mean, when he was talking about offensive linemen, they want them lighter, faster. He said pretty much the only bright spots were the running back situation. I think he mentioned Darnell Mooney by name. Even cornerback, I was a little taken away when he was talking about, the physicality, stuff like that. It's interesting. I think Ryan Poles is not afraid to make the move, as you said, Andrew. He's kind of ruthless, but also in a way where he knows he's going to believe in his plan. And if he's got to move a fan favorite like Mac, if he's got to move on from someone else, he'll do it. He's not going to show no hesitation at all. And kind of tying it into free agency, which is what we're here to talk about, I think this opens up the door a little more. It's only $6 million more in cap space. If you look at 2023, they could have a ton of cap space. And I've been a firm believer. I don't think they're going to go after a big tier 1 Ryan Jensen, Armstead, someone, that's making splashes, whether they fit or not, someone just a big contract. I think I could see them now, like going after someone big. Do they take the dice on Amari Cooper? Do they, spend big money and overpay, for someone, Valdez Scantling or DJ Chark or Travarius Ward, someone like that? It's going to be interesting, but I think they should use that money wisely. And to kind of kick off our free agency talk, I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on this. I think James Daniels a piece you could pay here. I always see value in young offensive linemen, but I also see why they would move on from him because they just moved on from Khalil Mack, so no one's really safe. But I guess in my eyes, James Daniels, when I look at him and I look at their zone run blocking scheme that they want to do the outside, I think he kind of fits that profile, and you're going to be paying some money for him. So I don't know how you guys feel about it, but if I were in this camp, he'd probably be the guy I'd want to keep right now on the roster over anyone else that's a pending free agent.
Well, James Daniels is interesting because we've heard a lot about what his price could really be. And then I think you factor in Ryan Poles and just one of the comments he made about basically going ahead and wanting to get lighter and faster on the offensive side of the ball. Daniels being just 24, 25 years old. He's incredibly young. You don't really find a lot of guards that are kind of going on to their second contract in the NFL that are about to hit free agency that are as young as he is. And, I think James Daniels has struggled over the last couple of years. He's had his fair shares of ups and downs. Obviously, having to swap from left guard to center, play all over the interior hasn't helped his cause. But when he has played, he's been relatively consistent. And you look at it right now, I mean, in terms of this scheme that the Bears are going to run, he is, I think, one of the best linemen on the roster right now in terms of just getting out in space. I mean, how many times did we see screen passes get called for guys like Tariq Cohen when Cohen was actually healthy, and James Daniels would be the lead blocker and out there? And so ultimately, I would bring James Daniels back, even if his price range is in the $7-9 million range, because he is a long-term building block, and I don't think his market's going to be as lucrative as some say it's going to be.
Well, and then you look and, okay, so this is from Pro Football Focus right here, and this is pretty much their scouting report on the top 200 free agents and what they think they're going to get. And you look and the strengths, the age, like you said, he's young. He's got tons of years ahead of him, I think. Zone blocking, pass blocking. He was actually better in run blocking last year. I think it was a career high grade for him per Pro Football Focus. So you look at that's the strengths. That's kind of what the Bears want. Obviously, the weaknesses, facing power. I think we could all agree, he didn't really hold up his own, but also the entire interior offensive line really didn't hold up their own last year. They were getting pushed back all the time, whether that's, a scheme, whether that's just they're not strong, they're not very good up there. And then, gap runs is a struggle for him as well. But I don't know. I think maybe he does kind of fit the lighter, faster type. And, I'm a believer. I'm not an Iowa fan, but they churn out some really good offensive linemen. So I think that's a plus for me too.
Yeah, I think the Daniels discussion is going to be very interesting because I think for a lot of points you just made, the zone blocking scheme that I think that Getsy, offensive coordinator for the Bears, wants to implement, I think he's a perfect fit for that. Get these guys on the move, get them in space, get them up to the second level. That's exactly what they want to do. It's that Shanahan type of offense where it's that outside zone run, we're doing play action, boots off of that, and then we're looking to get deep shots down the field with deep crossers, post, all those type of routes. So Daniels is a great fit for that. And the other intriguing thing for him is that he's very young for a guy who's hitting free agency. He's 24 years old right now. He's going to be 25 next year. So I think a lot of teams are going to view him as not like they're getting another guy in the rookie contract, but he's around that same age where there are a lot of guys on the rookie contract that are older than him. There are some guys in this upcoming draft that are older than James Daniels. So the youth aspect of things is very interesting. Now, where it gets a bit dicey here is the type of contract I think that he's going to get on the open market. And the thing here is we kind of see it here with PFF's projection for him, which Brad Spielberger, if you ever follow him on Twitter, make sure to do so. He does a lot of great work with the salary cap and projecting all this stuff. He has his market projected as about 5 years, $60 million, which is about $12 million per year and about $34 million guaranteed. That's a lot to shell out for an interior offensive line position, especially at guard. And I'm not sure how Ryan Poles is going to value this in terms of, whereas Ryan Pace valued the guards quite a bit. He spent 2 second-round picks on the guards. He invested a lot of money in guards in terms of free agency with, Cody Whitehair got a big second contract. Kyle Long got a big contract when Ryan Pace was here and extended him. He clearly valued having a strong interior up front. I'm not sure Poles is going to be like that. Maybe he doesn't really value guards as much and values more of, paying big at tackle and going cheap at guard. So that might be something to where he may feel like he can get, a player who maybe not as good as Daniels, but a lot cheaper as Daniels, and give you similar production in terms of the overall offensive line because you make up for it with having a really nice tackle play and spending your resources there. The other thing here with Daniels is that while there's a lot of intrigue and where he might have the upside to be a very good player down the road because he's so young and I think he's just now hitting his stride as a player. You look at what he's been so far in his career, he hasn't been an upper echelon type of guard yet, which I think he's going to be paid as. I think a lot of teams are going to be paying him more so projecting what he could be rather than what he has been. And what he has been for most of his career has been an average to slightly above average guard in the NFL who has really good athleticism, has been solid in pass protection, but like we kind of mentioned, has some issues against power, has some issues with the fact that, he's a little bit on the smaller side for a guard. So, he's a little bit more of a scheme specific player. And, for $12 million per year, while I think he's a great fit for what they want to do, will they be willing to make that investment for him? Ryan Poles coming to his first year here. Obviously, he doesn't view this roster the way that Ryan Pace in the last regime did. So, I personally think James Daniels is gone, but it would not surprise me if the market isn't quite as there as he wants it to be. If he comes down a little bit with his price, the Bears could maybe get good value on that. But again, I'm not sure how Poles views him. So that's really the most important thing here.
Yeah, the price tag is going to be the big thing. And, there's young offensive linemen that are proven are a hot commodity every year. We see it all the time with them getting paid. So like you said, Andrew, will the Bears, go there? I don't know. I honestly don't know, but, I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions. I wrote on Daniels in our hold them and fold them. I said hold them. I think there's a chance they will. And I do think, like you said, there might not be as big of a market as some people are projecting. I don't know. The way NFL is going, it's going to be crazy, I think, coming on next week.
Well, and what has to happen is it needs to be a bit of a waiting game. So what I mean to say by that is that let Daniels hit the open market and then just kind of let the market settle and get an idea for what kind of offers come his way, and then kind of go ahead from there. Because if you're James Daniels right now, you're realizing something that you have an opportunity to go to another team and start fresh, or you could stay right here in Chicago and basically become one of the unquestioned leaders of this offensive line and really of the offense in general. And, Zach, like you mentioned, I'm not an Iowa fan by any means, but if there's one thing Iowa's really damn good at, besides George Kittle and producing good tight ends, it's cranking out offensive linemen. And, I think we have to ask ourselves something too, is that if you're Chicago and you let James Daniels walk, is there going to be any specific player out there that could be right around his age that's going to be a clear upgrade over James Daniels? I think that's a question that we have to ask. But kind of getting away from James Daniels here, there's another Bears free agent that supposedly there's been a lot of rumors around, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see, guys, what happens with Allen Robinson.
Yeah, man, I'm like, I think the ship has sailed. I know there's some stuff going around that's, he could come back. He might want to come back. I don't know. Judging from everything he said, he was a true professional last year. I don't know. I think it's almost better for both sides if they just kind of part ways here. He in his time with the Bears, he's had a couple really good seasons, a couple of 1,000-yard seasons, one over 100-yard reception season. Last year he struggled, and whether it was his fault or not, the production just wasn't there. If he could come back, if he's there, 13, 14 million a year, I guess, PFF's projecting 15 million a year. I don't know. I think someone's going to overpay him. I don't think the Bears are going to be able even to match what he wants, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, if you can get him for $15 million a year, I think honestly, with the way things played out last year and, all the drama surrounding Allen Robinson, his contract situation, how he felt like he was being used within Nagy's offense, I almost wonder if, all of his struggles, some of that he has to own, obviously, but I wonder if a lot of it is just the fact that maybe just from a mental standpoint, he just wasn't there because he felt there's just something off with him and the coaching staff, him in the front office, and just things were not able to click. And I wonder whether that might be, be the main factor driving that. With that said, I think if you were to go for $15 million per year, I think it's going to be very happy with that because I think Allen Robinson is a very, very good wide receiver, and I think he's a true number one wide receiver. And if you can get a true number one for that value with, Mike Williams, for instance, got $20 million per year on a 3-year deal, and Mike Williams, I'm not sure if he's the caliber of a player that Allen Robinson is and has been throughout his career. And I know last year it put a bit of a sour note on his tenure in Chicago, but I mean, we got to remember that Allen Robinson, he was one of the better wide receivers in football from 2019 and 2020, despite having, pretty much Mitch Trubisky throwing the ball to him throughout that time. And Allen Robinson still produced like a top 10 wide receiver during that time frame. So, I agree with you, Zach, though. I think the ship has sailed. If he were to come back, I think it would be coming down back to, a reasonable price like we see in this graphic here at PFF, what they're projecting. But I agree. I think some team like Jacksonville, they could really use a number one wide receiver to pair with Trevor Lawrence. And I think, Doug Peterson there, Allen Robinson has experience in that style of offense. So that could be a good fit. Detroit, they desperately need wide receiver help. And, it would be kind of funny that Allen Robinson is going back to playing with another bad quarterback in Jared Goff. But if the money's there, the money's there. I think
he's used to it by now.
right. It's like it's a yearly tradition for him.
Even in college, not to get off your point, but like even in college, Christian Hackenberg, it's crazy how many bad.
He's literally never had a good quarterback, which is it's got to be the most frustrating thing for him. But at the same time, this is a business, so I mean, I think he's going to go to where the best offer is for him. I think those two spots, could be probably the best two ones. Maybe Cleveland makes an offer because they need a number one wide receiver. They're probably looking to get out of Jarvis Landry's contract, so they may have some extra space there. Philadelphia, I think, could be an option as well. So I think there are landing spots for Allen Robinson free agency where I think he's going to get priced out. And honestly, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. While I'd love to have Allen Robinson back, I'm a big fan of his. I think, last year there were a lot of issues that went wrong outside of his control. And, there were some stuff that went wrong within his control. But ultimately, I think it's best probably for both sides to part ways and try to go a different direction here, which is what I think is going to happen.
I really think, and let me say this, Allen Robinson is as good as gone as it gets. I mean, if you're Brandon Parker and you're A-Rob, I think that the way things have kind of gone for the Bears over the last basically 2 to 3 seasons, you're looking at this franchise that today basically told all of us through the Khalil Mack trade, we're ready to rebuild. You know what? I think it's Parker and Robinson, you're saying, yeah, goodbye. We don't even want to listen to what you have to say at this point or anything that you have to offer. Now, in terms of destinations, I could certainly see the Baltimore Ravens being a destination. You look at Baltimore, they've kind of tried over the last couple of years. They signed Sammy Watkins. They have Marquise Brown. They drafted him in the first round of the 2019 NFL draft from Oklahoma. Ultimately, they need another wide receiver there to allow Lamar Jackson to develop into a top tier passer in the NFL. So I could certainly see Baltimore, who again is a team that's not really known for taking big swings. I could see them going ahead and taking a shot on a guy like an Allen Robinson. Now, when we talk about A-Rob's tenure with the Bears, I mean, he basically had, I think, 1,100-yard seasons in 2019 and 2020. And again, the 2020 season sticks out to me because that right there, last offseason, going into 2021, A-Rob's value was higher than ever. And the reason I think it was higher is simply because not only did he cycle and start with Mitch Trubisky, a quarterback who was throwing him the ball for basically 2 years prior to 2020. But then they switched off to Nick Foles, and he still found a way to perform. And then the Bears went back to Trubisky, and again, Allen Robinson was still existent and still the Bears' best player. Now, when we talk about him, I mean, obviously, he's a true possession receiver in the NFL. Breakaway speed has never been A-Rob's kind of calling card, but also he just wins with separation. He wins with just being able to go ahead and to run routes at a really high rate. Now, in terms of, or really effectively, I should say, in terms of his contract, I would say he's probably, if Mike Williams is getting 3 years, $60 million, I honestly think that Allen Robinson is going to go ahead and get something like, an $80 million deal. Okay. I could certainly see him signing for like 4 years, 20 million or something with more guaranteed money up front. But if you're watching this, make sure you're chiming in. We're going to display some of the best comments on screen. I'm going to let Zach go ahead and take the cake on this first one from Shy City Sports. Did A-Rob give up last season?
No. I think that when you look at it, like Andrew said, a lot of stuff went wrong last year. Like whether it was injuries, lack of inconsistent quarterback play, maybe I don't want to say Matt Nagy sabotaged him, but just it just kind of felt off last year. So I'd say no. He was also very professional as well. Like I think he didn't have to come out and do anything. He came out after there was a report that his podcast co-host for the NBA podcast they do said that Nagy lost the locker room. I think it was. He came out. He was injured, so he didn't really even have to talk to us, and he did. So no, I wouldn't say he did.
I wouldn't say he gave up last year, but I think definitely there was a part of him where he was kind of mentally checked out a little bit in terms of not being quite as locked in as I think he was in maybe 2019 and 2020. I think there was a part of him where I think all the frustration of not getting the long-term deal I think he wanted for such a long time may have affected his morale a little bit. And he might have just let it affect his game a little bit too much. And I wouldn't say he gave up, but I think I just think maybe there's just something off with him early on, and it just might have stuck with him throughout the year.
Yeah, and we've got Holy Samurai Jerusalem here talking about, I think he ends up staying in the division and playing for his hometown team, the Detroit Lions. Look, the Lions are one of the more intriguing teams because you look, they're going into year 2 with Brad Holmes, the general manager, and Dan Campbell, the head coach. I understand, as Bears fans, we like to talk about how bad the Lions are all the time, but I think there's one thing you can't dispute is that forget the win-loss record. That team played hard for Dan Campbell last year, and Dan Campbell's passion and love for all of those players as well as the game of football really stuck out. And, I think they're committed to Campbell and Holmes for basically 5 more seasons. They're trying to do things the right way in Detroit for the first time, but I don't think that A-Rob's going to go to Detroit simply because you look at the quarterback situation, and then the Lions are also, I want to say, a good 2 to 3 years away from seriously competing because they are basically entering year 2 of a rebuild.
Yeah, sorry, my mute button was stuck there. Yeah, I just think the bottom line, is just I don't think we should expect Robinson to stay. I don't think, in my eyes, it doesn't make sense. I'd be shocked, to be honest. I would be more shocked at Robinson staying than Khalil Mack was traded. But looking at, other free agents, though, the Bears have a long list of guys, and they're going to have to fill 25, 27 spots here when free agency opens. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of the same players back. I think Jakeem Grant's a guy that could offer some value if his price is not going to be too high, but it looks like his price tag is going to be high. Other than that, though, someone like Deion Bush, to bring back. See, Pat O'Donnell become the interesting one because he's always just come back on a 1-year deal, but now with a new regime, do you take a chance on someone else? So, no, but I do think they're going to be active, and let's kind of move forward with the other part of free agency, the unrestricted free agents that aren't on their roster. And I don't know how you guys feel. I could see the Bears making a big splash now. I think, is it someone like Ryan Jensen? Is it someone, like Amari Cooper? Is it someone, like Travis Ward, who I mentioned earlier? It's going to be very interesting to see. I would be very happy if they went out and they landed, either a premier offensive lineman, a premier wide receiver, or a premier defensive back. I would take any one of those three in tier one and then kind of make smaller, smarter moves to kind of fill out your roster and maybe find some under the radar guys, There's rumors, who was it? I think is it Anthony Walker out of Cleveland, who's kind of been connected to the Bears already. So we should keep an eye on that. But I would be very happy with, one big offensive lineman or one big wide receiver or a big defensive back, and then kind of spread out your money a little bit. Maybe, instead of spending a lot on Amari Cooper and DJ Chark, maybe go lower and maybe you can get like someone like Christian Kirk if he doesn't get a ton of money, and then another, smaller, like maybe a Brian Pringle or someone like that.
Yeah, I think we should be clear first with Amari Cooper that while I think the expectation is that Dallas does move him, he still is technically on the roster. So
yes,
just a quick caveat there. I don't know what Dallas is doing because it seems like they're, bleeding players like crazy right now because their cap situation is a mess right now. And I think for whatever reason, I think it's possible Cooper's gone, but just want to make that clear first. But yeah, I think, if they're going to be spending big anywhere, I think it has to be on the offensive side of the ball because, again, you just trade away Khalil Mack. What does that represent when you're trading away Khalil Mack? It represents that, we're shifting away from a focus on defense and especially aging defensive players, and let's try to build this thing around Justin Fields. And I think when you're building this around Justin Fields, Brian Poles kind of said it in his, scouting combine press conference that getting a true number one wide receiver to bail your guy out, your quarterback out, is one of the most important things for a quarterback's development. So, if Cooper were to make it to free agency, I think he's that guy for you. And I think if you're going to splurge on a big signing of free agency, I think Cooper would be an intriguing target. Unfortunately, you get after him, the market just isn't there for that type of guy right now. DJ Chark is probably the next best, assuming that Michael Gallup stays in Dallas, which I think is the expectation. But Gallup could make it to free agency. If not, Gallup I think would be the second best guy. But you look at some of the options here that did not quite make it to free agency, like Mike Williams got re-signed. Who is it? Chris Godwin got franchise tagged. Devontae Adams got tagged, right? So a lot of these guys are not making it to free agency. Now, Chark, he's interesting. We have his profile from PFF pulled up here. The expectation is that he gets a 2-year deal, 2 to 3 year deal, probably short term because he's coming off of an injury. Maybe he wants to hit the market one more time while he's in his prime. But Chark is interesting because, I think there may be a team that's going to be willing to overpay him, which scares me about Chark because I think he's never been quite a number one wide receiver in Jacksonville. But there obviously is a lot of talent there. He's a big, specimen where tall guy, tested really well. I think he was a 4.3 40 type of guy. So this guy has deep threat ability. He's a good outside receiver in terms of he can run those deep routes on the sideline. He can get, back shoulder fades, jump balls in the end zone, stretch the field a little bit on crossing routes. That's the type of guy he is, but he's not really a technician as a route runner. He's not a guy that, gets yards after the space. He's not a big separation guy. He's more of a, go deep, chuck it up to him and see if he can make a play on the ball and maybe, the guy miss or two and see what he can do with it. But that's the type of guy you're looking at here. Gallup, Chark, you mentioned Kirk earlier. He's more of a slot deep threat type of guy. So I think Chark, if there's going to be any of these players that they're going to be looking after, I think Chark is the guy they end up targeting maybe.
Would you agree? Would you agree? I think, we always say they need a number one wide receiver. I still think they need a number one wide receiver. But I think getting a receiver that could stretch the field a little more would also be – it's right up there with me with the number one wide receiver. And nothing against Darnell Mooney. Yeah. He's a polished receiver. For me, he doesn't really fit in either of those type of thing. He's just like a true number two almost receiver.
Yeah, I think Darnell Mooney is a true number two. I think with Justin Fields' ability to throw the ball deep, I think getting as many guys with speed that can go deep as possible, I think that's always a good thing. So Chark, he fits that. I'm just worried that with his market, you'd be overpaying a lot for a guy who's probably more so just a one-trick pony. And I also fear that with another guy that we can talk about here who has some connections to the Bears, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who there's been a lot of smoke there about him being signed by the Bears. Now, he's a wide receiver in Green Bay over the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, basically, since he was drafted there. Obviously has connections with Luke Getsy, part of that offense for such a long time there. So I think Valdes-Scantling, I do think that's a scenario where that could be where the Bears go to. They're looking for another deep threat here. And again, he's going to be a little bit cheaper than Chark, but that price tag, you look at it right there. You look at the projection, 2 years, $20 million. Do you want to spend $10 million on a guy who I think his highest catch total in the season is like not even like 40 catches in a year. So this is not a high volume guy. He is a pure, vertical deep threat, doesn't really offer much else. Are you comfortable with that? With the fact that he's got familiarity with Getsy. So that's kind of that's a name where I think that's the direction the Bears will probably go, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. What do you guys think about that potential possibility?
Yeah, I mean, looking at MVS, there's a couple factors, and the two biggest factors are clearly number one, the familiarity with Luke Getsy, as you just mentioned, Andrew. But then number two, when you look at Justin Fields at Ohio State, I mean, his two best friends on that offense under Ryan Day were Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and those guys were really true deep threats. Now, MVS is not the dynamic playmaker even at the NFL level that guys like Wilson and Olave were and are soon to be. But I think MVS still provides enough of a security blanket in terms of Justin just being able to get back into play, kind of just how he's used to playing quarterback. I mean, we saw all the time last year. Justin was specifically looking at Darnell Mooney, one, because the wide receiver corps was just so bad when Allen Robinson was outside of Darnell Mooney, obviously. But the number two, Justin lives off those deep balls, and he wants to have that aggressive kind of mentality and just be able to sling the ball down the field. And, really as Bruce Arians would say, no risk it, no biscuit type philosophy. But ultimately, for MVS, I know PFF is saying 2 years, $20 million, but I would say this. I think his market's going to come in much, much cheaper than we all expect. And I would say it's probably going to be, like a 2-year deal worth, $15 million or something with about, $6 or $7 million guaranteed. And that would put, I think, if I'm doing the financials correctly off the top of my head, that puts you at like right around $6 to $7 million a year. So for MVS, we know the familiarity is a big thing, but then also what he could do with Fields and just knowing Justin Fields' play style, I think that it is a low risk, high reward type of investment that is worth making. But also, the Bears have to really be cautious here because you do not want to just invest in a player at the end of the day because he is familiar with an offensive coordinator, because it looks great on paper, but it might not work out in the long run.
I think, to kind of wrap up my wide receiver talk here, I would be fine if it was someone like Chark or Kirk, and then maybe draft someone. Maybe if you use one of those second round picks on like someone like Pickens, or if Christian Watson falls. I don't know where his stock's going to be come draft day. He's a guy that's really improved big time since the Senior Bowl. But if you go, if you sign someone like Christian Kirk, or you sign someone like I'm blanking now. It's just DJ Chark, or maybe you go out and get Cedric Wilson, depending on what the Cowboys decide to do. And then you draft a receiver and kind of develop them. I think that's a solid core. Who knows what they're going to do with Daz Newsome? They really don't have anyone else under contract besides Darnell Mooney right now. So I think there's going to be like potential for one, maybe big splash wide receiver over $10 million a year, and then maybe they'll go with a cheap 1-year deal with someone. But I'd be totally fine with going that route. I do think they need a draft receiver. I would like to see one of those second round picks because it's a very deep and good receiver class in my eyes.
Yeah, certainly if they can get like that top echelon number one guy, I think playing it by volume and getting as many solid to above average pieces as possible, that's probably their next best route. And ideally some guys with speed where you can really maximize Justin Fields' deep threat ability. Now, I think we can switch up from wide receivers to offensive line. That's probably the next spot I think the Bears are really going to try to emphasize here. And Ryan Poles talked it up a bit. He was not happy with the offensive line here when he originally looked at this roster, and I think we're going to see if there's going to be the most overhaul here in year one. It's probably going to be on the offensive line. Now, Tevin Jenkins, what do you do with him? Do you put him at left tackle, right tackle? I would put him back at right tackle and see what he does there. That's just me. Cody Whitehair, I highly doubt he's going to be viewed as a long-term piece. I know his contract's kind of tough to move out of, but again, we just saw them eat dead money for Khalil Mack's deal, so maybe they try to do the same thing with Cody Whitehair's deal. You never know, but they need at the very least a tackle, another guard here to bring in at right guard, and then a center. Now, the center market is really good this year. There are a lot of quality centers. We can talk about the big dog right here at the top of the market guy is Ryan Jensen from the Buccaneers. I think he's probably going to be the top priority for a lot of teams. This guy is big. He's nasty. He is a bit of a prick when he's out there. Gets into a lot of fights, certainly when the Bears play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the past couple of years. And I think he's a guy, look at his market, they're projecting him a PFF around 3 years, $40 million, so about $13 million per year. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets more than that because I think, I just think that a lot of teams are going to be looking to get a guy like him. He's a little bit older, so I'm not sure, if they want to get an older guy, but he's the top of the market. Are there any other centers, though, do you think that you guys think that could make some sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you said the big one is Ryan Jensen, and I'm still a firm believer. If you do go out and land a big money center or big money offensive lineman, it would be him. Looking like Brian Allen might be a value signing there, but he's also missed some time. This was really his first good year with Los Angeles. I believe he missed all of 2020 with COVID. Or I think he was actually the first NFL player to test positive for COVID, I want to say. And then in the 2 years prior, he had kind of, okay years, but he was battling injuries. Yeah, I think he does fit that kind of zone blocking outside run scheme that the Bears are pretty much going to run. And he's a guy where he's not going to be a lot, as you see here on the screen. He'll be $7.25 million per year. That's not terrible for a center. But you're also banking on him having another really good year in Chicago, playing in Chicago. So I don't know. I do think an interior offensive lineman like Brian Bozeman would be kind of interesting as well. I just think they got to shore up that offensive line, that center position. If you can give me a combo of bringing James Daniels back and maybe one of these big offensive line, free agent targets, or, signing one and then bringing in an offensive lineman with the second round pick. I think, it kind of shocked us because, doing all this preparation, we expected the Bears to have one second round pick. And this is a class that is deep in wide receiver and pretty, solid depth in offensive line. And now, we could be talking, they could go wide receiver, offensive line, they go offensive line, defensive back, they go defensive back, wide receiver. They have a lot of options they can go. They can go edge rusher. So, yeah, I think I'd be more comfortable. Maybe I would love Ryan Jensen and maybe James Daniels. I don't think that's going to happen. But if they could go with like Bozeman or Allen, and then, you bring back James Daniels and you get two of those without breaking the bank big time, it's kind of a good combo for me.
Well, and Ryan Jensen, look, let's talk Allen first. My biggest concern with Allen, like you kind of mentioned, Zach, was just the durability. Okay, he's really only played, sparingly. And again, another thing that I think keep in mind is that Sean McVay offense is just so naturally set up for players to have success. Something you don't want to take a chance on is a player that looks really good under Sean McVay, but then kind of goes somewhere else and flounders. And, again, guys like Jared Goff were probably the biggest examples of that. So that's my concern with Brian Allen. You don't want to invest in a free agent and tie up so much money, even if it is a front-loaded contract, or it could even be back-loaded, and then end up basically not having that player perform to kind of the standard that you had originally signed him to perform. Jensen, I think, is the cream of the crop in this class, kind of when it comes, or one of the creams of the crop in this class when it comes to talking about offensive lineman. I mean, Andrew, you mentioned it all. He's mean, he's nasty, he's physical, he gets after guys, he's a tone setter. He has been with the Baltimore Ravens, a really solid player. Basically did not miss a single snap for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 4 to 5 seasons there. Now, my only concern about Jensen is that as he does get into his early 30s, just how durable is he? When we look at someone like Bradley Bozeman, Bozeman's interesting because I believe he has a direct connection to now assistant Bears general manager Ian Cunningham, because Cunningham was part of the Baltimore Ravens front office for so long. And so that, Bozeman signing, I think, is one of those that you look at where a lot of people in the Bears fan base probably don't know who Bradley Bozeman is, but I think it can be a low risk, high reward type of signing.
Yeah, the offensive line is going to be interesting because, what polls did say, what they pretty much said what they're looking for. And, him being a former offensive lineman, it kind of gives him a little bit of an advantage in terms of scouting in that way. But, yeah, I expect it to be, a retooled offensive line. Whether Daniels is gone or here, what do you do with Tevin Jenkins? What do you do with Larry Borum? Because they got some big question marks. And for me, it all starts with that center position. I guess probably one of the last positions we should probably talk about. And, there's a couple guys here, but this seems to be the big money position at defensive back. Like, you have some guys out there where there's a lot of interesting names. And even just I'm looking here at Pro Football Focus's top 200 free agents. And you go down this list and you look at defensive back, okay? And right away, the first one that you see, number 4 overall, it's J.C. Jackson of New England. Now, they opted not to use a franchise tag on him. And he's a guy who's going to get a lot of money here. They're projecting 4 years, $72 million, about $18 million per year. That sounds about right. Talent speaks for himself. Fantastic corner. I don't think he'll be in the Bears' price range. I mean, and you look, number 10 is Stefan Gilmore, a guy who, was almost forgotten in a way, kind of rejuvenate his career a little bit there in Carolina. Carlton Davis out of Tampa Bay is on this list. Keep going. That's just in the top 20 right here. So there's a lot of guys. Casey Hayward was an interesting name. Excuse me. I'm blanking on the guy's name out in Los Angeles. I don't know if you could help me out with that, Andrew. Is it Darius Williams? Or no, it's
Darius Williams. Darius Williams. Yep.
Yeah, out with the Los Angeles Rams. So there's a lot of guys out there, and those are just names I mentioned. Those are all the top 30, and that's 6 to 7 defensive backs. Do the Bears spend big money there, though? I don't know. Last year they avoided the defensive back position in free agency. And, they had to let go Kyle Fuller. That's another name that's supposed to be a free agent this year. Bryce Callahan, a former Bear, that's a free agent. So I don't know, man. I feel like when I'm doing my research here for free agency, and this is probably going to bite me in the butt, and I'll be totally wrong here. I keep going back to wide receiver and offensive line as the 2 positions I think they're going to spend the most at. But I can see them turning around. Maybe they make a play for one of these guys. Maybe they go out and get Hayward or Darius Williams or someone like that. And maybe not break the bank, but spend a lot of money there and then kind of fill out the roster the other way. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but to me it kind of feels like, because I forgot about it last year, I feel like they're going to forget about it this year, even though it's a new regime. But there's a major need. In my eyes, they need another corner opposite of Jalen Johnson, and they need a slot corner as well.
So how about a cornerback that has experience and just got done playing under Matt Eberflus and Xavier Rhodes? Now, Xavier Rhodes, he play declined under Mike Zimmer, and then all of a sudden he heads over to Indianapolis and kind of has a bit of rejuvenating season. Now, I'm not saying Xavier Rhodes being 32, 33 years old is a player that is, a long-term solution by any means, but he is the type of guy where if you're looking at the Bears defensive backs room right now, the biggest thing Xavier Rhodes would provide is just familiarity and leadership. He would come in and essentially be another DB's coach because he's familiar with the scheme. He's played in it before. He understands how Matt Eberflus does things and what is expected of defensive backs in this scheme. And so Xavier Rhodes is another one of those where it's not necessarily going to be the hottest signing on the planet, because I do think Xavier Rhodes is going to be in a Bears uniform. by the end of next week. But I also think that he is someone that is another good low risk, kind of high reward type of signing for Chicago, who at this point is just looking to figure out ways to really fill in spots here and there before until they find a long-term solution.
Yeah, kind of touching on what Zach said about how the Bears pretty much ignored cornerback last year. I don't think they're going to go as far as that this year because they have more money to play with. It's not a ton, but they do have more resources now that Khalil Mack is out the door. But I think Xavier Rhodes makes a ton of sense. Like you said, he kind of said, he kind of rejuvenated his career a little bit. He was on the downturn with Minnesota those last couple of years. He was there with the Vikings in 2018, 2019 was clearly not the same guy. In 2020, he looks like a very good quarter once again. And 2021, I know he was battling injuries this past year, so that's probably some of the worry with Xavier Rhodes. But because of that, you can probably get him for very cheap, and he's probably not going to cost you a ton. And if he works out, I mean, you have your outside corners are pretty solid, at least for this season. Like he would be a Band-Aid. He would not be a guy who's going to be here to be built around long term. But if you need a guy just to come in and start for a year and kind of help establish the culture on this defense, which Eberflus is trying to do here, you can do a lot worse than Xavier Rhodes. I'll throw out another name there, Isaiah Oliver from the Atlanta Falcons. I think he kind of fits that mold of long, tall cornerbacks that Eberflus loves, and that's another thing to keep in mind here for free agency and the draft. What's Eberflus' type here on defense? He loves length in his defensive players, especially in the back seven, your linebackers, your defensive backs. He loves guys with long arms who can get in the passing lanes and affect the play in the passing game. So those are guys to keep an eye out. And I think Eberflus is going to do a lot of trying just to establish a culture on defense in this offseason. I think he's we're probably going to see a lot of short-term deals here, 1-year guys, 2-year guys. Some guys he's familiar with. I think he's going to bring in a lot of guys that he's coached before. We talked about Anthony Walker earlier in the podcast at linebacker. I know we kind of shifted away from cornerback here with this name I'm going to be throwing out, but another name to watch out for the Bears in free agency is Qaeda Muhammad, defensive end for the Colts the last few years. Eberflus loves this guy. He played him a lot of snaps. And now with Khalil Mack gone, there's going to be a lot of snaps available for the Bears on the edge now. Qaeda Muhammad, not a pass rusher, not a great pass rusher necessarily, but a very good early down run defender. And Eberflus likes to have that guy on his team where he puts a big-bodied early down run defender on first and second down to kind of stop the run, be physical at the line of scrimmage, and then kind of rotates with more pass rushers on third downs and passing downs with more bendy, twitchy edge players like a Robert Quinn, for example. So I think those are two names to watch out in free agency for the rest of the defense. But at cornerback, I agree. Xavier Rhodes makes a lot of sense. At safety, maybe they go with a guy like George Odom, who played with the Colts last year for the last couple of years and got some playing time last year. So there are a lot of directions they can go. But ultimately, I think I kind of agree with Zach here. Probably their most spending is going to be done on the offensive side of the ball, try to rebuild that unit first, and then try to get some value signings, some guys that are a little bit cheaper, maybe on the younger side that can kind of break out for them on defense. And just try to establish a little bit of an identity there first, and maybe try to add some talent in the draft now that they have more draft capital to work with now moving forward here.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And to kind of wrap things up here for the show, I think why don't we go around and everyone just give maybe a bold prediction going around for free agency.
Yeah, so you read my mind. I will go first because I was just about to kind of go ahead and say the exact same thing, Zach. But I think what's going to happen is the Bears are going to go out and they're going to surprise some people. And I'm not saying they're going to reel in a incredibly big fish, but I think what's going to happen is Ryan Poles is going to figure out a way to bring back James Daniels at a relatively cheap rate on a team-friendly contract. Then I think what's going to happen is that Ryan Jensen, because he's getting older, his price tag is going to be a bit cheaper than expected. And I think so that's my bold prediction is the Bears are going to go ahead and overhaul the offensive line. And what is basically a weakness right now to some people is going to really turn into a strength. And then kind of looking at the outline or the O-line, going forward, training camp's going to be very interesting as Bourne and Jenkins are on this roster. And if you have guys like Jensen and Daniels, then it legitimately is going to be some of the biggest, competition to watch, and certainly the most loaded positional group too.
Yeah, I would say my bold prediction, definitely expect a lot of overhaul on this roster. I don't expect a lot of the big name free agents to return. I'm not expecting James Daniels. I'm not expecting Allen Robinson. Bilal Nichols, Akeem Hicks, I think those guys are good as gone as well. But as for guys that they'll bring in at wide receiver, I'm going to predict that Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Byron Pringle are going to be the two guys that they're going to target at wide receiver, because both those guys, it makes a lot of sense. They have connections with this new regime. We talked about Valdez-Scantling, had the connection with Luke Getsy from Green Bay, but Byron Pringle, a guy that Ryan Poles is very familiar with. He was, I believe, a late-round draft pick of the Kansas City Chiefs in 2018, I believe, but broke out for them last year as a slot target. He was really the third option in Kansas City's passing game. So maybe he's a guy that the Bears view as, a low investment, 2-3 year type of deal guy who, they can get for cheap, and maybe his best football is ahead of them because he proved he could be a viable third option in the passing game. Obviously, playing with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, totally different environment. I understand that, but Pringle, he adds more speed. He's a slot guy. He has special teams value, and I think he's the type of player that Ryan Poles is going to want to target here, along with a Valdez-Scantling for this offense.
Yeah, mine is I want to say that they're going to make a big splash on day one, but I don't know. I think that's going to happen. My bold prediction is, I think there are going to be some surprising cuts coming here in the next couple of days, right ahead of free agency for the Bears. I think they're just going to completely overturn this roster, and we're going to see guys that maybe we didn't think would be cut. Maybe they're moved on from. Maybe someone like Trey Cohen is gone. Maybe Cody Whitehair. I know his contract's a little hard to get out of, but yeah, I'm going to say there's going to be a little more roster turnover, and there'll be some more cuts, potentially some more trades. I think within the coming days, and we'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning into this edition of Bear Report Live. Make sure that you check all of us out on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, at AJ Freeman 25, and at Zack Pearson. That's at ZACK_Pearson. Make sure that you are checking out the Bear Report. We've got you covered with off-season coverage, and then make sure that you have reviewed, liked, and subscribed to the podcast. Zach and Aaron Lemming have their own show, which they record on Tuesdays, drop on Wednesday mornings. They just recorded an emergency episode about the Khalil Mack trade that I think is right around half an hour or something. So go check that out. Myself and Andrew have you guys covered at the Picks for Polls podcast with NFL draft coverage year round. We're going to try and get some more prospects on for you guys. But anyways, enjoy the rest of the day and have a great day, Bears fans. Bear down. We'll catch you guys next time.